Hello, and welcome to the Humans Over Numbers podcast, the show that's willing to stand on its head to see the workplace from a new perspective. The show is brought to you by Milestones, makers of the Beyond This Day, Small Wonders, and other keepsake gifts for employees, recognizing major life events. Request your sample today at milestonescompany.com and see the impact they make for yourself. I'm Felix Dusablon, hungry bookworm and aspiring polymath, and today I talk to Grant Collins, who is the People Director at Nimble. Director of People Operations at Nimble. And so we have a conversation about remote work. This is something that's close to Grant because Grant works for a company that is 100% remote. They do not have any brick and mortar building. They are all remote. And they have been. Now, a lot of people have been remote recently, but it's not like that. He has been remote. He works for a company that was designed with remote in mind. And so he has some fantastic insights on being remote and ways to be more effective at remote. This is an important conversation because right now, a lot of people are still remote, and a lot of companies have dabbled in remote work because of COVID-19. Though I think it's something that might be playing a bigger and bigger role in the future. More and more companies are going to have to offer this to give employees an autonomy. And so this is something that's becoming part of the normal landscape of the workplace. Hello everyone, I'm here with Grant Collins, Director of People Operations at Nimble. We're going to talk about remote work, trends, culture development, and best practices for remote working. This is really close to Grant, and this is a topic I think he'll have a lot of insights on because his company is one that is 100% remote. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, that's right. We've been 100% remote since we started.
Yeah, see, that's fascinating. I think that's some insights onto how a remote corporation can work because a lot of companies sort of converted into remote to survive this year, but It'd be interesting to see one that was designed with that intent and some of the things that you have, some takeaways you might have for us with a company that is made to be that way. So I work in a brick and mortar company, and going remote was kind of difficult because It was sort of really outside of their trends and the way they are. So let's talk about this. We're pretty familiar with remote work. Everyone is at this point, thanks to just the COVID situation and everyone shutting down and going remote in the spring. But I get the feeling that this idea or this emotion to be more remote is not over. What do you think the future of remote work is?
Yeah, it's a great question and great observation too, as far as it not being over. I think you have seen remote work and the trends that we're seeing and the people that I'm close with within the remote work space is that really COVID sped up remote work, the transition to remote work by 10 years. And it's kind of, I like to refer to it as once people get a taste of what remote work feels like, they don't want to get back because there's so many things that come with remote work that it almost forces companies now to have that as an option just for recruiting purposes, because there's so many companies that are going this direction that it almost becomes mandatory to be able to offer some sort of hybrid model if it's not a full remote work model.
Okay, so you see that it's becoming an option that like every company is sort of expected to have, and then everyone sort of had it more. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing in the trend is that companies that didn't have remote work are now needing to put remote work in place because most companies that have been around for a long time or are more technological are already transitioning or have transitioned to more of that. So if people are going to stay with that curve, they're going to have to offer remote work or some sort of hybrid mode of working from now on.
Okay. See, I was not sure if you were going to be like, a lot of people are sort of saying COVID started the idea, but eventually everyone's going to be remote. And I didn't know if you were someone who's in that party that it was like, everyone's going to be remote work one day. brick and mortar is a thing of the past. We're just sort of hanging on to it. Or are you
Yeah,
saying?
I think what you're going to see within the industry is not necessarily that brick and mortar is going to go away, because people still enjoy the interaction that you have with people. Like, that's something that it has not gone away. Like, we're still human beings. We still like being around each other. But what you're going to see more and more from my perspective is that you're going to see location be more about the task than a restriction. So it used to be that we go to work and we are there at work, and that's what work looks like. But now it's going to be, hey, if you're a manufacturer and you have to run a manufacturing machine, you got to go to the manufacturing plant, or whatever that might be. Within that context, you're going to see locations start to become more dictated by task rather than just the norm of work.
Okay, so that's actually something that I think is one of the biggest challenges in some ways for a lot of companies, because that's, you would think it's self-evident that a company should look at someone's performance based off their task completion, but for so many reasons, I'm not sure. It looks like people are really not doing task completion. It's like they're looking at they're looking at like time spent doing tasks, right? They like how long people are in the building for, right? And then when people went remote, so many managers were struggling with that so hard because they couldn't figure out a way to sort of monitor that, because their model wasn't tasks, which would be fairly easy to monitor. Their model was it was time spent on the tasks instead of tasks themselves.
Yeah. One of the things that we see when it comes to remote work is that companies really are having to have are going through this crisis of like, how do I monitor employees? And I just think it's just a really like, when you look at management from that point of view, there's all sorts of crap that comes along with that type of culture. And really what remote work forces you to do is, I would even say, more than task-based work, it's value-based work. So instead of like, hey, I know that John is a great employee because he spends every day from 8 to 6 in the office. Like, that's not really a good determinant of whether John is a good employee or not. Really, John being a good employee is if he provides value, and it doesn't really matter if he's in the office or not. And so that's really a new thing that companies are having to look by or live by. And it's something that should seem obvious. Like, it should seem like, yeah, this is where we would like to go as a group. But I think some of the obstacles that people are running into with this remote work conversation is that we have to get rid of some of the old norms that we had of judging performance, and judge performance based off of value and not by things that we thought or constructed as being value.
Okay. So let's just try to break this down as the easiest way. Then let's look at some pros and cons of it. Then what would you say some of the biggest pros and some of the biggest cons? Because we're saying we have to shift our mentality, and we've been saying that we also need to be aware that this is an option that more and more companies are having, especially now. But why do it and why not? Like, let's paint it as clear as we can, maybe.
Yeah, I think I'll obviously be a little bit biased as far as why do it, because of where I've come from. What I like to say to people is I was born into remote work instead of people transitioning into remote work, because right out of college, during college is when I started with Nimble, which was at that point a startup, and now I've been with it ever since, and we've grown into it. So as I graduated college, I didn't go to a normal brick and mortar office situation. I was in the remote work area. So I'm going to be a little bit biased in that area, but I do have enough experience in both to be able to say or speak to both. But really, when it comes to the pros of remote work, it really comes down to the employee experience and the employee ownership. What I mean by that is, for so long, as we've talked about before, work was this big block in our calendars that prevented us from really having control over our lives. I've got to be at the office from 8 to 5. And if little George has a soccer game at 3, like, that's too bad. What remote work does is it removes that, and it gives the ownership back to the employees so that they can really focus on completing what their actual job is instead of clocking in and clocking out, and then be able to have the time and the energy to be able to focus on what is actually important to them, be able to have the flexibility to be able to go to the soccer game or go to the dance recital or whatever needs to happen. It really puts that ownership back into the employees' hands. Lots of companies speak about ownership. It's like one of those things that everybody has as like a culture that they're working towards as far as like a value. Like, yeah, we want people as owners. But when it really comes down to it, like, you really want people to be owners of their time. And in that way, as you break it down, it really gives people an opportunity to be able to be their best self because they feel like they're in control rather than being in this hierarchy of the kind of the old way that we used to work, which is, in office, you have to have this part of time set apart. The challenge comes, it sounds great, and it is great. The challenge comes when people transition into that area and they're not ready to be able to take ownership of their own lives. They're used to having work be at work and home be at home. As soon as you morph those two things together, you have to be a leader in your life and decide how to really satisfy the shareholders, the different people that are involved in everything that you're doing, and you've got to be the one that manages it. So people that aren't used to that or don't have that skill set or don't feel comfortable there, it's going to be kind of rough to be able to transition to that type of a work environment because it really does take a lot of ownership and a lot of self-leadership. Once you have that ownership and self-leadership, however, remote work is the way that you can really take back your life in a way. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for the employee. And on the employer side of things, when you give people that opportunity or that ownership, they're able to take more value in their work and provide value instead of hours. And that's really the big shift that we see at our company at Nimble, is that we are focused on value instead of time. And so we get a lot more out of people because they have control over their lives than we would if they were just, 8 to 5 or whatever the schedule was.
Okay, so with that then, it's the sort of the benefits are so reliant on the individuals being the right type of individuals. Does that put extra stress on, not like stress isn't stressing, but emphasis on hiring the right type of people who will be self-motivated and do their job? I know like every job says, oh, are you a go-getter? Are you a are you really a motivated person? And everyone's going to say yes, but in many ways, like it's not as important, right? But as like for remote work, from what you're saying, it sounds like it's really important that someone be a very self-motivated and disciplined type of person who's going to know that they have to give value to the company, and that be a sort of something in the forefront of their minds is, how do I still display this even though I have the flexibility, right? Given people who will make the right choice on how to do their work even though they're not in work.
Yeah. Well, I've heard feedback from companies that talk about this monitoring concept that you discussed. They're like, how can we trust our employees? And the question that I always ask in response is like, why did you hire them in the first place if you have to ask that question, right? And we had, like what you said, we could cheat a little bit with organizations that were not in a remote work environment, because you could have managers sitting right next to their employees. And so they know that they're not on Facebook, or they know that they're not off doing something on their phone, or whatever it was that we conclude is not good for a work environment. They could kind of monitor that. Well, when you go to a remote work environment, like what you said, all of those training wheels are kind of pulled off. And so it really does put that emphasis back on the hiring process so that you have good people from the very beginning. And you really do have to focus more on values as far as who is this person really, and are they a leader, or can they develop into a leader, or does our infrastructure allow us to develop them into a leader? And then it really narrows down your focus as somebody that is hiring people to, this is what we're looking for, and this is what's going to fit in our culture. Every company is going to be different because every company is going to have a little bit of a different support system or infrastructure. And some companies are going to be able to have that hybrid model where there is going to be a little bit of an office. So maybe there's more of an opportunity to be able to provide some of that training or ownership. But companies that are full remote, absolutely that leadership becomes like crucial. That becomes a huge part of that hiring process.
Okay, so you had this thing you just mentioned, and now it's disappearing. Oh no. Okay, yes, it's back. You were talking about companies when they're going to either hybrid or they're going fully remote, talking about support system, and that's actually something I was thinking about especially when COVID hit and everyone went remote. The support system wasn't really there, not because they didn't want it, but just because the company, it was new and they hadn't built it yet.
Yeah.
And so, what if a company wants to go more hybrid? Like, what are some steps they might need to take to get more remote or to be more accommodating towards remote work?
Yeah, I think it's really about being intentional about actually implementing remote work. A lot of what we've seen has been reactionary. So, crap, COVID's here. We got to go remote work. And hopefully in 3 months, it'll all be away. It'll all go away and we can go back to life as normal. What we're seeing, though, is that COVID's lasting a little bit longer than what people bargained for. And it's becoming something that people prefer or that people desire. And so now companies have to say, do we want to continue to progress forward with this remote work trend and become intentional about our infrastructure to be able to support a remote team? Or are we going to go back to the old way of doing work? Now, I say old way of doing work. I'm not necessarily saying that everybody that goes back into an office is going back in the dark ages and they're not going to survive as a business. It really depends on what the business is, what their culture is, where they're going. But some of the trends that we are seeing is this shift towards more of a work environment, remote work environment. And so when a company realizes that, hey, I want to be more intentional about providing a remote workspace, there's so many things that a company can do to provide the same type of support that a company had before in office, out of office, but it just takes intention in putting that in place. And it's totally different than in office in some respects.
Okay, so let's talk about the intention. Yeah, you definitely need to be intentional. Let's do a little bit something more practical. So company culture is something that a lot of companies, some have pride about their company cultures and some don't, but everyone wants to have it better. And most of it happens is something sort of you said earlier, everyone likes kind of working in a building because there's that social aspect. There's that I can talk to them and they can talk to me. And it happens around like the water coolers. In fact, I think that's like the highlight of a lot of people's days is sort of having that moment where you get to chat with someone at lunch or you get to have that conversation. You get some people like this, trade that gossip when they're getting their coffee. That's not there because there's no proximity now. So without the proximity, how can a company be intentional in fostering their culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to just continue to use that word intention. I know we've talked about it a lot, but that intention needs to be coming from the executive team and saying that we want to create an inclusive culture. So how do we do that? But it also has to come from the individuals. Because like you're saying, some of those nudges or interactions or serendipitous meetings aren't going to happen the way that they used to because you're walking down the hall and you see somebody else walk down the hall and you're interacting with them. That's not going to happen as much. But if as an employee, I am more intentional about who I am interacting with, who I'm interacting with on Slack or who I'm interacting with on Zoom calls, or just being really intentional about my relationships, you will find as you are intentional within your own sphere at a company that is remote, that you can create just as good of a culture, if not better, than if it was in office environment. So those are some things that like an employee could do. They could say, like, who do I not know within the company? How can I set up a quick meetup with them? Or how do I set up like a water cooler channel within Slack. Like that's something that we do as a company, where we just like have really fun things or get to know you questions or whatever it might be. It's just kind of like not work in that Slack channel. So there are some things that we can do on that lower end or in the employee's sphere of influence. From a management standpoint, there are a lot of things that people can do as well in terms of creating a culture that that's okay, that we see the value of, hey, if Christian wants to go talk to Sarah for 30 minutes and it's not about work, they're just trying to get to know each other, like that's okay, because that's actually happening in the office anyway. Mm-hmm. The problem happens is when from a top-down perspective, we say like, you just have to be focused on work and there's no time for being a human being. And so when that top-down culture is more open to those ideas, then the company really is going to be able to dictate what is actually needed there. What do people actually want within the culture? There's no one size fits all, like this is what a remote culture has to look like. In fact, I would say that Nimble's culture is probably a little bit shifted to more of an extreme remote work culture than a lot of the companies that you're hearing about today. Because we are a remote culture first, we don't have some of the old expectations of interaction at work that has to take place in order for me to be happy. Some other companies that have transitioned need to do that, like, getting drinks or going to lunch or creating some of those interactions that they used to have, or a movie night or whatever. And that's fine. But from our standpoint, why I say we're a little bit more extreme is because we see remote work as the benefit. It's not the movie nights that's the benefit. It's we get to be working remote, and that is the benefit, which gives us flexibility and ownership in our time, which allows us to be more intentional in our own lives, interact with our family, do our hobbies, whatever we actually want to be doing. And so we would rather be doing those things than getting on a Zoom call at 7:00 at night to watch Lord of the Rings with our coworkers. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just where we reside as a company. And I think why we're very successful, because we are very intentional about that with our hiring process. So people know that coming in. So there's no expectation of us, really cultivating this huge in-work environment. We have this understanding that like, this is one of the biggest perks is remote work. It's not the other stuff that sometimes comes along with talking about culture.
Okay. So you talked about, it's like with culture, like the top part and the bottom part, and like how to foster it from both the administration being open to that, and also some of the flexibility they have to. And you talked also a little bit about what the employee themselves are actually somewhat responsible for that. So How can an individual make remote work better for themselves, right? So you talked a little bit about they need to be intentional about having just shooting the breeze conversations, just chatting with somebody, right? They need to be okay with just sending a joke to somebody, or like, hey, look, this is something I thought was cool. You should check it out. What do you think? And having a little bit casual conversation. What else can they do to make remote work better for them in some ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. COVID really has a little bit of a damper on my answer to that question. So I'll talk in a pre-COVID and a post-COVID type situation, so you can kind of get a little bit of a understanding, because obviously COVID is going to get to a point where we can go back to more of a normal way of living. So I want to cover that whole spectrum. Before COVID was happening, what I would say is within that, the opportunity that employees have is to be really intentional with their life. Like, who do they really want to spend time with, and where does that happen? So like being able to be social with your friends outside of work more because of the flexibility of work, like that's a really awesome perk or really amazing thing to be able to do. Now with COVID and quarantine and different things happening across the nation, that's not as possible. And so you're going to see a lot more kickback as far as people feeling lonely, like they don't have a big social life. And it's because they just don't, because of the different things that happen within what's going on with COVID right now. And so that's why a lot of people are feeling a little bit of that constraint right now, as far as like not having a lot of connection. It's not remote work's fault. And sometimes we say that, oh my gosh, it's remote work that is making my life really miserable. from the way that I look at, from my personal experience, it's not actually remote work, because work is work, whether you're doing it in office or out of office. It's just the lack of interaction that we're having. Remote work allows you to have more of a choice in who you're having that interaction with. So before COVID occurred, that's like an incredible opportunity for people to be able to choose to spend their time with people that they really care about and love. And then, but right now we're having a little bit of problem because there is no other outlet. And so that's why people are feeling some of those feelings of loneliness that wouldn't happen in a normal remote work experience. So sometimes I worry that people are getting this bad impression of remote work, not because remote work has anything to do with it, but because of the current circumstances that are causing some of these things to be catalyzed into something bigger than what really is.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really funny point. I was actually thinking about this recently. I was thinking that a lot of people have a really bad impression of remote work. I was actually talking with my coworkers about this like 3 days ago. I was talking about it recently, and I was like, you know what? Would you feel differently about remote work if you weren't in your house with your whole family and your kids and your husband and everything? Like, if everybody in there distracting, being like trying to school your kids and like make sure they don't, walk in on a meeting and stuff. I was like, if you were just alone in your house remote working and then didn't have like all these constraints that are put on by COVID, would you have enjoyed remote work? And I get the feeling that almost everyone who said yes. Like, I personally kind of enjoyed it because I'm somewhat introverted, and I enjoy my alone time and reading and doing just very individual activities. But I feel like most people, the thing that hurt them in COVID was exactly what you're saying. Is like, it was the lack of socialization. It wasn't because they were remote. It was because they were completely isolated in every part of it. It's like if they could have gone remote for just work, but still got all the perks of like normal day-to-day life pre-COVID, I think almost everybody would have been very on board with remote work. Though, except for maybe some managers who were like, I don't know how to evaluate stuff.
Yeah, totally. And it's not to say, again, I'm not a person that is going to say remote work is an absolute solution for absolutely everyone. Some people are going to do better in an in-office environment, but you're right in the sense that that's the big perk of remote work that is often not considered a perk. It's remote work and having ownership and I wouldn't say complete control, but more control over how you spend your time. And then if people are struggling after having that, it's more of a personal, I don't want to say problem, but it's more of a personal thing than it really is a company thing. It's more of a person not being willing or able or whatever it is, wherever they fall in that spectrum, to be able to take advantage of that more than it is that remote work is bad.
Yeah, I was thinking of something similar with like a lot of people with like managers. They were like, they can monitor people, make sure they're doing the right task, but still the people who are going to not pay attention and work are going to be doing the same thing, like usually regardless of where they're located, right? Home or not, they're going to play solitaire and have the window to minimize, but they just don't have to hit the minimizing button. It makes me think, I was a teacher, and the students, they had MacBooks, and so anytime you'd walk by, they would do the quick 3-finger swipe, and their window would switch, and so you would just see their schoolwork. But everyone knew they were doing it because you could see, like, as you walked up, their hand jerked across their keyboard, and you could see it switch, and it's like, I know what you're doing. And if you had them doing remote, we all know they're not really going to be paying attention. It's going to be the exact same situation. It's not having to be concealed anymore. They're not like, oh no, I'm going to get caught. And so I think the people who were motivated at work are still going to be motivated at home. The only reason that it didn't happen was because the whole family was there and you were isolated, and so you were going crazy if you were a social person, and then you were not getting it. So I think what you're saying is earlier a minute ago with it's maybe not for everybody, but I think a lot of people would have liked it more than how many people do like it now.
Yeah, and I'll say that, I definitely identify as somebody who is like an extrovert. Like, I love people. I love interacting with people in person. Like I think remote work has been classified as like only people that don't like people like remote work. And I'm like a little bit of a stark example of someone that really, really likes people and also really likes remote work. And what I found is that, I'll give you an example. There's a team member on my team. His name's Christian. And we have been at the company for almost the same amount of time. He joined 3 months after I was there. So we're pretty close. In terms of us going through the whole startup together and being close. I didn't meet Christian till January of this year in person, but I'll tell you that I probably have one of the closest working relationships I've had with anybody in my life with Christian, just from us interacting over Zoom or Slack or phone calls or whatever it was. And so for me, I really didn't feel a huge downgrade of my like social interaction at work when I went to a remote work setting. In fact, like some of it is a little bit more intimate, because if you think about it, you're in people's homes. Like you meet people's kids, you meet people's wives. And if you actually care about the person, you're going to get to know them a lot more, because you're not just seeing work Christian in this example. You're not just seeing who Christian is at work, you're seeing who Christian is in his entire life. And so there's so much more to get to know about that person than there was just about what you're working on at work. And that's the only thing you're attached to. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity that people sometimes miss because of what we've talked about. But it's I'll tell you that from my interaction, and this is just my personal experience, I've not seen a huge difference between my relationships I've built when I've worked at places in office and out of office. If anything, I would say that I would lean over to the remote work side of things over the in office.
Okay. I appreciate that. I appreciate your candor in this topic, because I know your company is 100% remote, and I know it seems like you would probably have a preference since you decided to work there.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of expecting you to come in pitching hard for remote work, be like, this is it, this is the way to go, and you've taken a much more middle ground approach than I was expecting, and I think that's actually probably more accurate though. Is companies are should be offering more hybrid approaches instead of necessarily go straight remote, because it's not the best for everybody, and it's not something that every employee right now is situated for.
Yeah.
I don't know what in the future that might look like with how many people, like what percentage, and I'm sure the percentage will lean more remote as future progresses, but I think some of the things you're saying to it are important, and also just being aware of the different type of temperament of a person that you need to be getting into your company in order to do remote. Because a lot of people are going to work better in the office than they will remote, because they just sometimes, I think the setting has a little bit to do with it, and so walking into work, having it separate helps them, I think. And I think that's the biggest challenge some people have. So what do you think about that challenge, the work-life balance? So you were saying earlier that it was great, and I was actually thinking about this as you were talking about how great it is, like people could go to the baseball game and stuff, and I was like, wow, that flexibility would be wonderful if you didn't have COVID, like just being able to do the things you need to for work, and just mismatch your day. Like when COVID was happening and like it's full front and I was working remote, I would take walks at like 3:00 every day. Like that was my break. I would take a walk, and I couldn't do something like that normally, and I was like, this is great. Or like because I didn't have to wear like dress clothes or like work clothes, I could, like at lunch, I could just do a real quick workout, eat lunch, and then I was like really energized for the day. But most work breaks don't allow that. But the only thing is, when your works like that, how do you not, and you especially if it's someone who's motivated, wants to be perceived by their company as valuable, how do they not let the work take over like everything, instead of letting them, like, how do you strike that balance? Because either I feel like you're going to go way one way, which is what everyone was afraid of, people just not doing any work, but like what about the other side as well, like people who are going to be doing work all the time instead of just work time?
Yeah, and you're gonna see both of those things. I'm glad you brought that up in this discussion, because it's not just people that aren't working; it's people that are working way too much. Because there's this really the gap that I see in this whole thing is it really comes down to a person's individual ability to be a leader in their life.
Hmm.
And that's really what it comes down to. And I'm not saying for anybody that's listening who is experiencing one way or another, I'm not saying that you're not a leader or that you're not capable of being a leader or that you're somehow lesser than somebody else who's thriving in remote work. Like there's a lot of factors that go into this. But when we look at both of those scenarios, it's really a person not being able to operate within their lives as somebody who can take control of one thing over the other and be able to put in place things for them to not work 24/7 or to work a full value day. Like what you said, the interesting thing about the whole conversation though is that with remote work you actually have the ability to do that. Like you can actually make the changes. You can go and have a work at you can have a walk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that makes you energized where you couldn't at work. Like it's so much more individualized. And it really just comes down to people actually taking the leadership in their life to say, what actually aligns for me? What time really should I be working? And can I create that with my work? Like, or what time should I be going to bed and getting up in the morning? Or where should I have my office? Should it be in a separate part of the home? Do I need to figure out some way to be able to make that happen? Or am I fine to work at the kitchen table and it works great? Like all these questions are just things that the people didn't used to think about. Like that wasn't on their plate because HR or somebody else is going to think about what my desk looks like or how the office is set up. Well, now it's the person. And if the person can take ownership in that conversation and then create the work environment that works the best for them with the company, that's when you're going to be able to actually stay in that middle ground, like what you've talked about. There's always suggestions I can give about how people could do that, but it really comes down more to somebody's individual leadership.
I think one of the cool things that could happen though, like that could happen if you did that, is you would be able to be very much more self-aware, right? If you start becoming aware of where your fault, you're gonna be struggling to be productive, right? In work, you just sort of you're there from this time to this time, and you
Yeah.
do work, and everyone knows there's like points when you're more productive, especially people who are more prone to procrastination. They're not going to do a lot, even though they're in the building. They're just sort of like clicking through their work. But then
Yeah.
when crunch time hits, they're like on it. And then there's some people who are going to have like really productive mornings and less productive afternoons. And I think there's a really good opportunity with remote work for people to really take control of that, become aware of how they operate in their best ways. You were saying like kitchen table or their own office. Like, what
Yeah.
is your way to be productive and efficient? And then take really control of that. Because if you realize how much time you're really productive and how much you're not, you might realize you need to work way less time than you do to get the same amount of
Sure.
work done. You could be like, I do a coffee in the morning, I espresso shot, and I burn through all my work, and then I'm done at lunch, right?
Yeah.
In which case you might like, and then because you're someone who's highly productive and then not, but that'd be something
Sure.
that an individual would have to figure out.
Yeah, and
So
that's why actually measuring by value rather than hours is so important when you make this switch, because you're absolutely correct. Like somebody can provide the same, you can have the same individual and it takes them 30 hours to provide the same value as somebody that is spending 40 hours. And it allows the company to actually be able to reward off of value rather than time.
hmm
And that's why that mind shift is so important, because if you keep people shackled to an in-office culture, your remote culture is not going to work because they're different. But if you are able to see remote work as it is and really put some of these things in place, you're going to have employees that are actually leaders in their life and in turn are leaders in their business. And it's working from an environment that has that type of approach. I'll tell you that like my life is different because of the company that I work for. And it's not just because like I have opportunity, it's because the company is very intentional about having me be a leader in my life and I've seen what difference that makes.
Wow. I think to summarize most of everything we've said is, for management or for yourself being remote, it comes down to being intentional, right? If you're a company and you're wanting to do remote or have that hybrid option, you've got to be intentional about it. And I think this applies to everything outside of remote work, which I guess would be inside remote work, like inside normal work. Weird that speaking into that way, but in normal situations and outside, being intentional about what you're doing, where you're spending your time, how you're making that culture is so important, but especially with remote, because there's so much more ownership of every single element, and there has to be so much more just very deliberate action taken.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think I need to wrap that up. I think we've sort of covered a lot of the points, but I think the biggest takeaways are that intentionality, and then some of those benefits being that, like, that flexibility and that value, and for companies that want to be remote, to be very deliberate in how they do it, but also being aware of the flexibility they have to offer, especially as regards to like the employee's time, obviously. And the best way to do that in an efficient and a productive way would be to hire people with high values and strong characters, and so that they will add value to the company, because that's, in the end of the day, that's what every employee is there for, is to add value, not to crunch some numbers, but what do they get out of that as a company and as an individual. So
yeah. The only other thing that I would just like caboose onto what you just said is that, like, trust just goes a long way in everything that happens, especially on the employer side. Like, if an employer can really trust their employees, it sets that foundation for everything you just described to occur. And once you establish those relationships of trust, that's when the company can really thrive in a remote work environment.
I'm surprised we didn't touch on that much. That is one of, like, the linchpins. That's a hinge point for, like, everything, especially remote. It's just trust. Everything hinges on trust with remote work. So I think that wraps up our main discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick fire 10 fun questions.
Cool.
Did not, like, you don't have to be giving me really serious answers for these. They're sort of really just fun questions. So here goes.
Great.
What book do you think everybody should read?
Ooh, How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. Game changer.
Okay. I might have to put that on the list. What was the last thing you splurged on?
Oh, that's a good question. The last thing I splurged on would probably be a new laptop. I got a new laptop.
Okay. What's your most useless talent or superpower?
My most useless talent is that I can smell peanut butter from across the room. So if someone cracks a jar open, like, it can smell it instantly.
Okay. What's the most interesting thing that you have seen or read this week?
I read a piece of an article from, I believe it was The Guardian, but it was focused on how micro-targeting in social media is being used within the election, and how that is having a huge play on this current election than it has in times past. That's probably the thing.
That is interesting. What would a world populated only by clones of you be like?
Oh my gosh. They'd be really, really specific about what they like and what they don't like, and everybody's kitchens would be clean.
Okay. What, as a child, did you think would be awesome, but as an adult, it turns out is not?
Oh. Being an adult? Can I just use that as the answer? Like,
yeah, I guess it is. That's a pretty solid answer on that one.
like being adult was like this thing that like you looked like I'm gonna be an adult one day, and I'm like I still don't feel like I'm an adult, and so I don't know if that's gonna change. I keep on talking to people that are older and older, and they say it doesn't change. So I think that's probably what's overrated is being an adult, quote unquote. I'm air quoting right now.
Okay. What word is a lot of fun to say?
Serendipity. I love that word.
I love that word too. Serendipity is a great one. I also just love its meaning.
Yeah, true.
What is something everyone in the world can agree on?
Can agree on or should agree on?
Can.
That having a large backyard is good.
Okay.
Space to walk around.
Yeah, yeah. If you could disinvent one thing, what would it be? So make it gone.
People are going to kill me for this, and it'll probably give a little more context to the peanut butter thing, but Reese's peanut butter cups. Absolutely. I would get rid of them. I'm allergic to peanut butter, so that's it's like the worst smell in the world for me.
Wait,
but like peanut butter and chocolate, because I like chocolate, but when you mix chocolate and peanut butter together, like it's like the worst combination, because I like chocolate but I hate peanut butter, and so I don't know how to explain it. You can't.
Okay, but so wait, that makes your useless talent super useful. If you can smell peanut butter from across the room, you're like, oh, that's danger. That's danger. I know where that is.
That's actually a very fair interpretation of that, Felix. I agree.
Okay, last question. What life skills are rarely taught but are very useful?
Oh, I would say I would just focus on one: the ability to listen.
Yeah, I can't agree more. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone. Listen, and then if you loved it, which I did, connect with Grant on LinkedIn. Just connected with him through his name, Grant Collins, and he's great. He's great to be on LinkedIn. His content's really interesting. He's actually one of the reasons I got LinkedIn working as well as I did and stuff. It's like he was actually, I think, like the third person I talked to. I started my LinkedIn account and I bumped into Grant and like started talking to him, and he was very friendly and gave me tips and stuff, and it was just really nice to have that as a starting point. So whether you're starting your time on LinkedIn or you're well into your way, I think checking out Grant Collins would be very much worth your time. So, any other ways that people should check you out? See anything any other projects?
Yeah, the main stuff that I post is on LinkedIn. So that's the best place to connect with me.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Have a great time. Thank you for listening to the Humans Over Numbers podcast, brought to you by Milestones. If you found it informative or entertaining, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment or review. I'm your host, Felix. Until next time.